Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Permission to Love podcast. I'm your host, Jerry Henderson, and I'm excited to have Lisa back with us once again. Today, we're going to be talking about our past. Why does our past matter? Why is it important to talk about it? And why is it important to revisit our experiences in order to heal? Why is that an important part of healing? Now, before we get into the episode today, I've got a couple of things that I want to announce. Number one, group coaching. If you've not yet signed up, it's not too late. It's going to start February the 19th. You can simply go to jerryhenderson.org/coaching. I'm offering a couple of scholarships for people who may not be able to afford the price point of $95 a month right now. So if you're interested, send me an email at jerry@jerryhenderson.org or simply DM me on Instagram. My handle there is Jerry A. Henderson. The other thing I'm doing is I'm offering a sliding scale. So if you can't quite afford that $95 right now and you need help, you can go ahead and sign up on my website and use the code SS2024, and that sliding scale price is $47.50 a month. I'm really excited about this program. I'm really excited about getting us together and going on a journey of learning how to heal our relationship with ourselves. Now, another announcement that I'm really excited about is my book, Returning. It's a collection of thoughts and poems on self-love and healing, and it's really designed for you to read the thoughts, the poems, to take time to reflect, and to really go on a healing journey for yourself. And so I've intentionally left a lot of space in the margins for you to make notes, for you to write those things to yourself that maybe you wish you would have heard but never heard. So if you want to be one of the first people who get notified when the book gets released, you can get on my email list if you haven't already. And everything that I mention in these episodes, there's always a link in the show notes for you to easily access it. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's episode. I'm excited to once again have my therapist, Lisa, here as a part of this journey. So Lisa, welcome to another episode of the Permission to Love podcast.
Thanks, Jerry. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm always glad that you're here. Today, we're going to be talking about our past and why does it matter, and why does every therapist seem to want to go digging around in our past. You know, we have these current issues, these current problems that we're trying to solve, but yet all of a sudden all these questions come up about, tell me about your childhood, tell me about your parents, tell me about this and that. And I remember our experience with that. And I remember moments where I'm like, why the hell does that even matter? I'm just trying to not drink anymore. And what does it matter about my relationship with my dad or my mom? And it was really a big disconnect for me, to be honest. And at times, I really felt a lot of resistance, and I know we'll talk about that later. But it was interesting to me now that I look back on it and see that there was that resistance. But as a therapist, help the listeners and the viewers of this podcast understand why the past matters. So Lisa, why does the past matter when you're working with someone?
The past matters because it lays the foundation for who you are. It's that simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me
and
more
I know
about that.
It's really, really hard to think, how did something that long ago, how is that affecting me now? But I really like the analogy of thinking of ourselves as a house, right? And let's say that you have a house and the walls have a crack or a bit wobbly, right? So let's pretend that that's who you are in your life right now. There's a few things that are maybe cracked or a bit wobbly, right? Depression, anxiety, addiction, broken relationships, whatever.
Okay.
And when you were looking at that house, if you wanted to fix the walls, right, you could put something to hold it up and make it more secure. You could put some plaster. But the truth is, it would probably begin to wobble or crack again unless you looked at the foundation. Yeah. And so that's the analogy that makes so much sense, is that, the past is the foundation of who we are. And if we don't look at that, we can, slap whatever on ourselves, saying that we have a crack or we're wobbly, but eventually the depression or anxiety will start to show up again. And so you have to go back and you have to look at the past and make sure that the foundation is secure and cemented and level, if you will.
Okay.
So I don't know. Does that analogy make sense to you?
Yeah, it does, because it addresses a lot of what my journey has been, which was the patching, right, of the drywall or patching of things. Because for me, it was I'm trying to deal with my symptoms. I'm trying to deal with my current pain, Lisa. I'm not trying to figure out or revisit pain in the past. I've done my best to try to bury that. So why the heck do we want to bring that up? And we'll talk about that here in just a second. But yeah, it does make that really clear distinction between present problems being symptoms of a foundational issue that's not been addressed or isn't being addressed.
Yeah.
Would that be correct?
Yeah, totally. And it's why I get a lot of clients who say, I've been to therapy before and I got some great skills, but I don't feel any better. And it's because a therapist has to understand that you have to go to the foundation to heal. It's
Yeah.
one thing to know things, and that's really, really, really good. It puts things in context,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
can be downright interesting, right? But it
Yeah.
doesn't do the healing unless you go underneath and you fix the stuff in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because as you were talking about that, it reminded me, which, I obviously still struggle with, but it reminded me of that really acute feeling that I had for so many years. I mean, it sounded like 4+ decades. There's just something wrong with me, and there's just like something off, and I don't feel, right? I hear the lessons about, well, you should do this in order to heal, or this is, what the healing journey looks like, and you try to plaster on, those solutions, but underneath you feel like a fraud. You still feel like an imposter. You feel like you're bolting on. And so, do you think that's why people, like as you said, really struggle with therapy in terms of feeling some transformational therapy happening because they're just trying to patch things on?
Yeah, of course. And
Yeah.
we live in a culture, right, that doesn't want us to go to the past. I mean,
Mm.
bygones be bygones, or
Yeah.
what other sayings are there? Move
Yeah.
forward, or
Yeah.
let it go, or
Yeah.
don't revisit the
Time to
past.
move
I don't know. There's a
on.
bunch of them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Time to move on. Like I said, let it go, get past it, all of those
get past.
things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're
Mm.
not really ever. I think it's seen as weak to have to go back in the past. I think what's seen as more stoic and strong is to just be able to be like, well, that was then, and this is now, and I'm moving on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And wouldn't that be
Well, it
nice?
would be nice, but the problem is, and like with me, is that you're trying to run a race with two broken legs, right? And you keep wondering, why can't I make any progress? Why can't I move forward? And you're like, somebody keeps saying, well, you got a couple of broken legs there. And you're like, it's okay. That happened, 4 weeks ago. I'm good now. I should be okay. Or whatever. Or you've lived your whole life with those set of broken legs and you're trying to walk a journey towards healing. But no matter how hard you try, you're not addressing the root issue. So here's a question, Lisa. My past was really painful. And a lot of the people who are listening to this and viewing this have a painful past. And I know you do as well, Lisa. And we've done a really good job at finding ways to bury that. And part of that has really served us, right? Because the burying kept me from addressing the pain. The drinking kept me from really having to look at some of the issues that I needed to look at. If my past has been so terrible, and I had such a terrible past, and I've done such a good job in my mind of distancing myself from it, why do I have to dig back into that? I mean, we talked a little bit about it, of it's the foundational work, but why do I need to talk about it? Why do I need to sit with you as a therapist and talk about that past?
Well, you don't. So if your life is going great and everything is hunky dory, don't visit the past, right? But what we're really talking about and to is people who that's not the truth. Is that, depression, anxiety is lasting a bit longer than a few weeks and is not situational. So there is something, situational depression, that you would expect you're depressed after you know, lose a spouse or something like that. But we're talking about and to people who have addiction and a broken relationships and depression, anxiety, more than just your average person. And if that's the case, if it's a pattern or something that you're experiencing for a couple weeks, then you have to talk about the past. But if life is working and you're not in pain and all is well, don't dig in the past.
Sure. Let it be.
If the past
Let
needs
sleeping
to
dogs
show
lie.
up, yeah, if the past needs to show up, the past will show up. So
Sure.
I don't think it's, you know, I don't want you to have your listeners think, well, everybody's got to do the past.
Sure.
They don't.
Yeah.
And if you do need to address the past, life will indicate that you do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I may think that I'm living the present, but what I'm actually doing is still living my past, right? And when we look at, for me at least, when I looked at my story of I'm in the present moment, trying to live my life, trying to work, trying to be in relationships, and I'm in my mind thinking that the past has no bearing on any of that. It's just that I can't figure out how to do life now is my thinking. But what I'm actually doing, at least as I'm thinking this through right now, is I'm reliving my past each day, but it's in this present moment, but I'm just not aware of it. It's at a subconscious level, and that subconscious past of brokenness and separation, as we talked about in another episode of being separate from ourselves, is showing up every day in my present, and it's actually determining my present moment.
How did your past determine your present moment?
Good question. Um, well, that's a really good question because I thought I was over my past. I thought a couple of things that allowed me to be over my past. And for those of you who've been watching or listening to this podcast, you'll know a little bit of my story about the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, emotional abuse that turned into addictions at the age of 9 and 14 years old. I was in rehab and just a whole, really just brutal process growing up. And so then I came to faith, right? Became a Christian at the age of 17. And I was told that I should forgive, I should let go, I'm a new person and I don't need to address that, just let the past be the past, you're a new creation. And so all of that really resonated with me because I wanted to bury all of that and I wanted to distance myself from that pain, and so it gave me a lever to pull to do that. But the reality is that it wasn't gone, the pain was still there, even though I could feel the sense of being forgiven under that set of thinking, but then understanding that even though a person might feel that they're forgiven or that they're learning to forgive others, it doesn't mean that they still have a gigantic wound inside of them. And I also thought I was over my past because I was doing so much to create an image and to be perceived as somebody that didn't have that past. And so even though I thought I was over all of it, I truly wasn't, in the way that it was being indicated to me that I wasn't, was through this constant sense of shame, self-hatred, self-loathing that made me choose things that I thought I was worthy of. So I would get into relationships that I knew were going to be really toxic for me, drinking myself to death, becoming a workaholic, driving myself to outrun my story or to try to heal a wound that was still wide open and that nothing was providing any salve for.
No, you just spackled it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
kept spackling it. I tried
Yeah.
spackling it with faith, I tried spackling it with relationships and work and accomplishments, and then I just tried pouring alcohol down the thing, and none of it worked. So.
No, and that's kind of what I mean by life will keep showing up, and telling you, well, maybe your past is something that is perhaps guiding you a bit more than you thought it would or is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked some about, if I've had a really terrible past, and I don't want to talk about it, I've buried it. But then, and there's a real acknowledgement of that, right? There's an acknowledgement that yeah, that was bad, and I don't want to talk about it, so why do we need to dig into it? But then what do you do with a person who says that they have a really good childhood? I know for me, I mean, I knew my childhood wasn't good, but I also minimized it to such a degree that it was like, yeah, some stuff happened and it was, it just wasn't good. And so I minimized it, but then there's probably folks who just feel like, no, my childhood was great and I've got nothing to talk about, so why do we need to dig into it? How do you handle those kind of situations, Lisa?
Lots of people will say that. And as a therapist, you you are always in the place of just being curious, right? So for me, that prompts the question, well, what made it great? Not particularly asking that person to be defensive, just curious. Why do you think your childhood was so great? And people will say, well, it was great because I it was so carefree, and I rode my bike at 6 o'clock at night and came in for popsicles. Okay. Or I knew that I was loved and wanted. Okay. Or my parents, it was great because I had clothes and food and shelter. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to know why people think their childhood is great. And it's a rare childhood that's so great that you can just check that box that nothing happened that would influence who you are, right?
Yeah.
So as a therapist, you start to question that, and it comes to find out, for example, maybe somebody says, well, my childhood was great, but my parents I never saw them work through conflict. Okay.
Okay.
Well, and maybe somebody says, and that was really great that I never saw them work through conflict. But as you kind of go through therapy, you figure out, oh, well, that's why in relationships now you can't stand up for yourself, or you can't, address anything that's uncomfortable, and now you're resentful and angry and have a hard time communicating anything that's not pleasurable in this relationship. So your past is showing up because your parents didn't show you how to do conflict.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a
Right.
number of ways that a good childhood can still be good. It can be
Sure.
great, and also, have some ways that it is currently affecting you.
Yeah.
Another one would be, if you have parents that really had super high expectations and wanted you to be perfect, and now you have, degrees on your walls and money in your bank account and a beautiful spouse and a car, and you feel super empty inside, that would probably be that you thought that what you did was your value, and that somehow unintentionally your parents gave you that message that that's what they cared about, was what you did, not who you are.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because as we think about the voices of our past, right, that all of a sudden become our voice, and we forget to separate, or we lose sight of separating the voices of others from our voice or from our authentic self. And I was working with somebody, and they were talking about how their family history was one of accomplishments and achievements and financial success, and they followed that path, and yet never felt like, regardless of the fact that they were making multi-millions of dollars every year, they did not feel like they were worthy of love because they hadn't yet quite accomplished enough, which then you connect that voice to a childhood, which seemingly was a good childhood, but there was a voice that was one of, if you don't do X, then love is withheld. And so now your voice to yourself is, well, if I don't do X, I'm not worthy of love. And so it might not be something really glaring, right? It may not be what people are always classifying as capital T trauma, but there are, all these, I don't know if we'd call them micro traumas, or we don't want to get into comparative trauma, right? One's worse than
Right.
the other because it's about what happens in you more than what happens to you. And so the challenge, though, is that if we can't see it, okay, so Lisa, it's like I had a good childhood, and I can't even make the connection between those things that might have just been like, well, yeah, my dad was a little hard on me, but, or yeah, my mom, always wanted me to look and act a certain way, or whatever those, voices are. How do you help a person begin to identify that that's the original source of it and it's not who they are, if that makes sense?
Well, yeah, it does make sense. And that's the beauty of being with a therapist, is because we have a trained lens to be able to make those connections.
Yeah,
And you probably aren't going to make those connections because,
yeah,
well, it's just hard to see those things, especially when there's reasons that you don't want to see that. But
yeah,
hopefully a therapist is, trained to look for those, and hopefully they can introduce those in ways that might might certainly be painful and uncomfortable.
yeah.
But when I would make connections for you,
Mhm.
how was that for you?
Well, I always thought about like these truth bombs that were happening during our sessions where I would talk. I'm a talker, ENFP, and one that yeah, I have a lot of words I verbally process, thus having a podcast. And so the challenge for me was that I was too close to it to be able to see certain things. And so you would help me become curious, allow me to talk, and then you would just ask some questions, ask me to kind of poke around on something. And the beauty of how it worked for me was that it was me finding myself to that source of truth with guidance, right? And it wasn't you saying, well, you know what, that's X. You're doing that because of Y. That's why this is happening for you. So it wasn't this labeling, because I'm a real firm believer that as a person discovers that truth and somebody helps them make their connections, those aha moments really stick with them instead of somebody saying, this is what's going on with you, because then
Yeah.
I get a choice to accept or reject, right? But when it's self-discovery, I can really resonate with it. But and there were things like my relationship with my mom. And I remember I was talking to you about a dating relationship that I was in. And you helped me make the connection that I was actually kind of dating somebody who was taking a place or meeting a need for me that my mother had never met for me. And you really helped me understand that my relationship with women in the romantic space has a deep connection with my relationship with my mother growing up. I had no box for that in my head before then.
Mm.
And so that connection became a very big aha moment for me and allowed me to observe and become curious and aware and then make more mindful decisions.
Nice. I'm glad
Yeah,
that you figured that out. That was a huge piece for you.
it was a huge feat.
Well, and that is such a hard thing as a therapist. I know we're not talking about being a therapist, but I will tell you that is one of the more difficult things, is because you know it. You've already you see it and you're like, "Oh, there it is." And it would be
Yeah.
so easy, right, to just say, "Well, here it
Mm.
is, and we can save you
Yeah,
some time and money and I'll tell you," right?
right, right.
But it's not half as effective
Mm.
as allowing a person to get there their own way. So I'm glad that you
Yeah.
thought that I was able to do that with you.
Yeah. Well, darn, now I'm curious, right? Because I'm like, I bet there's about six other things that Lisa's going, dang, Henderson still hadn't seen this one yet. So we'll have to jump into another session and continue these self-discovery processes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway.
right. Yeah, and it's just hard. It's hard to go back to
Yeah.
the past for a variety of reasons, and it's
Hmm.
hard because blaming your parents is a tough one for people. Even if
Mm.
your parents were outright abusive, kids, when somebody comes to take a kid out of a really abusive home like Child Protective Services,
Yeah.
I mean, the kid, as they're walking out of the door, a lot of times is still screaming for mommy or daddy.
Yeah.
And it
Right.
doesn't, you think, well, aren't you glad to be getting out of here? Well, probably part of them is, but part of them is
Hmm.
also, really, really, yeah, connected in some, maybe some really unhealthy ways. But nevertheless, the child parent bond is a big one. And so when you go back into talking about that stuff, you have to talk about your parents. as it was their
Yeah.
responsibility to help you navigate emotionally.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think most parents, if we went out and did a survey, they'd be like, well, yeah, my job is to keep my kid, safe and
Yeah.
healthy physically and provide for them. But I doubt that anyone would say it was also my job to help my child navigate emotionally.
Yeah.
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 And
Mm.
so it's hard to
Yeah.
it's hard to talk about your parents, and you feel like to some extent you're betraying them, especially if they
Sure.
were well intentioned and they did the best they could, and they
Yeah.
came from crappy childhoods as well. I deal with that by saying, well, let's talk about all the good things your parents did. And maybe if they were really lousy, maybe the best thing they did was, give you a mattress on the floor. I don't know. But
Yeah.
most parents do the best that they can. And so let's just honor the parts of them where they did a great job. And for some people, that's a long list. And for some people, that's not a long list. But I think that's
Sure.
a really important thing to do, and to be able to put that aside and then say, but for our purposes, right, in therapy and to help you heal, we're not really interested in the ways that they did well. We want to
Sure.
focus on the ways that they shortchanged you or screwed you up.
Yeah.
And so once you're able to kind of honor that and put that aside, people might still feel like to some extent they're betraying their parents, but they're much
Yeah.
more willing to, they're much more willing to go there.
Yeah, well, I like that because you are trying to honor, right, a piece that doesn't feel like you're completely betraying. So, I just want to dig in a little bit around that because for me, you know, I I knew and I could really easily put my finger on the source of a lot of my trauma with my dad. That was very easy for me to see. Now, in that, I also was able to go, well, he had a really tough childhood. And, so he was just kind of doing the best that he could do. And I was also encouraged right away, as I shared a little bit earlier, when I came to faith, that you need to forgive your dad. That was like almost 101 when I came. So you need to forgive your dad. And then I began to justify the story. Well, he grew up in a really tough situation, so he was just kind of doing his thing and trying to figure out how to do it. But I knew I could equate the unhealthy behavior and the source of a lot of the family trauma to him. My mom, on the other hand, anytime, Lisa, you wanted me to try to talk about like maybe what my mom's role was in any of that, and you didn't quite say it that way, but I had this kind of underlying resistance that started to come up because it felt like to me, I saw my mother as a victim. I
She
saw my
was.
mother doing the best that she knew how, and that I
She
had
did.
zero, yeah, and that I had zero right to have any judgment towards her. And because of that narrative. And so I wasn't able to do was trying to figure out how to heal my relationship with my mom, even though she's passed. She passed away from cancer, but I still couldn't get to a place of working on healing that because I was so busy defending her. So, talk a little bit about that, with me, with others, everything that I just kind of unpacked that people are living through that, right? They can point their finger at one person, then they start making excuses. And if they're in the Christian space or any kind of religious space where they feel like they have to forgive, and then maybe trying to defend a parent, etc. So, not sure what the question is in all of that, but maybe just kind of discussing what your experience with how to help a person navigate all of that.
Yeah, well, a couple things come to mind. First of all, is the forgiveness thing, right? So
Yeah.
somehow forgiveness has gotten misconstrued in that to forgive somebody, you need to also clear them of responsibility.
Mm, mm.
And
Wow.
that's a big doozy, right? Because you can forgive somebody and know that they were doing the best they could and also continue to hold them responsible.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's what happens with parents um, is is understanding that yeah, they did the best they could. I mean, I'm a parent, I did the best I could, and that doesn't also alleviate me from my responsibilities.
Yeah.
Even if you're a parent who has no clue, like most American parents, that it's your job to help your child emotionally grow and feel safe and understand
Yeah.
their emotions and put names to them and not tell them to, go in a corner and figure out what they did wrong. And 3-year-old's
Yeah.
supposed to come back and give you some explanation of their self emotionally.
Yeah, right,
Crazy.
exactly.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
I remember when you pointed that
So,
out to me that a timeout is probably one of the worst things that you could do to a child in some ways, right? Isolate them, separate them, and leave them to themselves to figure it out, and then they can only come back and get your love and approval when they've said the right things to you. So anyway,
that's right. Yeah,
yeah,
timeouts are, and most American parents are all hunky dory on timeouts. It's considered good
yeah,
parenting. That they're
yeah,
basically like, you're showing me emotions I don't like, so go
mm,
sit by yourself
mm,
and be separate from me, and I'm not going to help you figure it out and figure
yeah,
out how, you, yeah, and come back to me and apologize and tell me what you did wrong. And that's really great. You're only 4.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and all I'm sitting there thinking is, I'm got to use the bathroom, or I'm hungry, and I'm going to say whatever they want me to say so that I can get out of this corner and move on with my life. Which then, yeah, deep levels of people pleasing, character building, all that stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
and not that a child's making those, conscious decisions at that point. So anyway, I
No.
digress. Back
No,
to,
and that is actually a great example of I had a
yeah,
good childhood, right? And so
yeah,
then a therapist is as you get to know the person and you're saying, so what happened when you were really angry or you hit your sister over the head because she ate your
mhm,
pizza or whatever. Oh,
mhm,
well, I got sent to my room by myself
yeah,
for the night and I was
yeah,
told to think about what I did wrong. And
okay,
then, and so it's like, oh, well, how is that playing out in your life currently? Right?
yeah,
Well,
right,
I don't know how I feel. Oh, well, that's interesting because the people that were supposed to help you figure out how you feel
yeah,
weren't there. So how the heck are you supposed to know as a 44-year-old man? Well, I don't
sure,
know how I feel. I feel happy, sad, or pissed off.
right, yeah. That's
Yeah.
pretty much it. Three categories, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
and once you tell a client, did you know there's as many feelings as there are colors? It's just amazing. I don't know if I ever sent you like a feeling vocabulary, but it's
You did.
amazing how many adult people not only don't know how they feel, but they
Hmm.
don't know words. They don't even know options.
Yeah.
That most women will say, I'm frustrated when they're really enraged. But they think that's
Oh,
the only option, right? So,
right.
because we don't have parents that sat us down and said, hey, what was really going on with you? You looked really mad. That's called mad. And when you're
Mm.
mad, you don't hit your sister over the head. Here's what you do with it. Parents have no idea that they're responsible for that.
Sure, absolutely. Because you could be listening to this or watching this and thinking, holy crap, there's no way I'm going to get parenting right. Or, come on, man, my parents, like you said, they did the best they could. They didn't even know about emotions, they didn't know how to process that stuff. And how the heck are they going to get me to figure that out? And gosh, we all just need to get a little bit tougher, get some more tough skin. We got a real soft generation walking around. Everybody just needs to kind of, suck it up, realize they did the best they could, and move on with things. And if you start getting to the layers of, well, I didn't get lunch because I acted out bad, then no parent comes out unscathed as being a crappy parent. And then we're all super traumatized because we didn't get a sandwich. And so, that can become this viewpoint that people have. And so that then gets all this resistance of, well, I don't want to blame my parents and I
Mm-hmm.
just want to move on from it. And I'm an
Mm-hmm.
adult now and I just need to deal with my crap and doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have anything to do with that. How would you deal with that? I mean, what's your thoughts on all of that?
Well, that also is really exciting to me as a therapist because I love resistance.
Okay.
Resistance is really, really interesting. I actually had somebody in therapy many years ago who walked into my office and said, we will not talk about my past. And I said,
Mm,
okay. And we did not for a year.
Wow.
We
Okay.
just talked about why they didn't want to talk about their past. And eventually they talked about their past once they felt safe enough to do that. But the resistance is really interesting, right? So
Mm.
that would be where I would go with that is, well,
Mm.
first of all, I would respect somebody's choice in doing that, but it would trigger me to go, oh, there is some meaty stuff in there for this person.
Mm.
There's some really worthwhile stuff because they are so very clearly resistant to talking about that.
Yeah.
And what is that about for you, right? Why?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
oftentimes it's because I don't want to blame my parents and
Hmm.
I don't want to feel all the stuff that I'm going to feel when that comes up. I have no idea how to handle feelings.
Yeah.
Those are usually the two main reasons.
That's interesting too, because why don't we want to blame our parents? I mean, even parents who have done things to us that would be classified as child abuse or absolutely terrible things, but yet we still have that resistance to blaming them. What do you think that's about?
Yeah, I actually really don't know, except that I just think it's biological. If I
Okay.
were to guess, I just think, and there are people that are, I've worked with them that say, oh, heck yeah. I mean, they're
Mm.
not getting anything from me. They were awful, and I totally blame them. And then we kind of work on, well, what do you want to do with that? Do
Sure.
you want to move from that place, or are you comfortable with blaming them? How is that impacting or showing up in your life? But I
Yeah.
think maybe it's just a biological thing that we just are
Mm.
always looking for their approval. I mean, no matter if you're 59 and a half and have a
Yeah.
career and have a life and have all these other things, when I talk to my mom, I still want her to tell me how good I'm doing.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's just, I don't know, if I sat and thought maybe even about animals, that
Hmm.
somehow they're just always, they always, the penguins can always figure out who's their mom out of 2,000
Yeah.
penguins.
Right.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
because you can get into the nature nurture, right, and you can trauma bonding, and situations that kind of unhealthily, made you feel like you had to please them to get their approval and everything that goes with that. But then, like you said, there's also that very core underlying piece of biology, genes, survival, right? And I need the approval of parent because they're my caretaker, and if they don't care for me, um, wow, that's a more scary narrative than trying to even, just to win their approval, I would assume. So,
Right. It can also be that, if they're really, really terrible, it's like, well, if they were really terrible, how terrible does that make me?
yeah, hmm,
Yeah. I mean, I must have been really terrible if they had no interest in taking care of me in any way.
sure. Yeah. It's almost easier and safer for me to assume there's something wrong with me than it is to assume that there's something wrong with them. Because I make that choice, then it's a much more risky scenario, right? That we've talked about before, than and I was thinking about it the other day, it almost becomes, and I'm going to test this thought a little bit, but it almost becomes a control mechanism, survival mechanism for me to think there's something wrong with me because I have no control over your behavior, but I can control my behavior. And so, in some sense, not always, right? But there's this thought that if I can point the blame at me and try to figure out what's wrong with me, then I can maybe start trying to control how I respond, how I don't respond. And so the narrative of absorbing, I'm the one who's wrong, there's something wrong with me, even in an adult abusive relationship or any of that, that you go, okay, so now all of a sudden I have some ability to control this space, which might keep me out of trouble in that space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And if
Yeah.
it's about you, right, then you don't have to do anything about the
Right.
relationship, right? I mean,
Right.
if you say, well, it's not about me, it's about him or it's about her, then you're
Mm.
forced to look at that in a different way.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, in some ways, it's so much easier to make it about yourself because then you don't have to
Sure.
hold anyone else accountable. And if people aren't willing to take accountability, which is so common the case with parents, it's a rare parent who says, let me hear about how I screwed up. And I just want to
Yeah.
take responsibility for that. You know, the
Right.
parenting is it's so hard, and it's
Yeah.
a natural place to want to become defensive and say, are you
Hmm.
kidding me? You're going to hold me responsible for that? Do you know what the hell I was doing just to keep you alive?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
I work
Yeah.
3 jobs to put food on the
Mhm.
table.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Hmm.
parenting is tough, as we all know.
Yeah. Absolutely. As we're talking about the importance of the past and even our resistance to talk about the past, I know I had definitely some resistance, and that resistance came out in minimizing, right, and deflection. I'm not one that's going to just throw out a hard no of, we're not talking about my past, Lisa. I mean, that's just not my personality. And so my personality went towards a softer approach of, yeah, some stuff happened, it was bad. And I would laugh and dismiss it in that way. But the really powerful connection that we made in a call one time was about how I was trying to heal adult Jerry. I was trying to get adult Jerry to behave. I was trying to get adult Jerry to stop drinking and to figure out how to do relationships and get his, stuff together. And
Yeah.
so, uh, and I didn't realize that, like, I didn't feel safe. I mean, I had this underlying sense of just a pit in my gut all of the time, 24/7 alarm bell going off. I didn't make the connection that adult Jerry didn't feel safe because little Jerry never felt safe. And that became a core belief and a thing that just went with me my whole life. When I learned to heal that space with little Jerry, that alarm bell stopped going off all the time. So I provided safety for him. So how do you help a person make that shift away from adult person, adult Nancy, adult Jim, or whatever, towards the little parts of them that were wounded, and understanding that that's their experience today, and make that path and make that healing work?
Well, I think the first thing is just to get the person to start to remember that they were a little person.
Mm.
And they were a little person with feelings. I mean, so much of us just doesn't even pay attention to that. And then it's about talking about what happened to them and what was going on and what they might have been feeling and what they need. And usually when that starts to come up, somebody can find a place in them where they start to feel compassion or some other tender feelings towards this little kid that they kind of pushed out. And then it becomes about integrating that little kid and not just feeling sorry for this little kid who went through this stuff, who's having such a hard time, and actually starting to integrate and remember that that little kid is actually you.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you kind of get what or remember when we did that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I would talk about the little Jerry, like, and I'm doing right now, right, of this distance of he language, and then making that bridge to me, right, and moving from judgment and shame to observing with compassion as if I was seeing someone else with compassion, towards self-compassion and seeing that part of myself with compassion. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's kind of like the way I think of it is just, that we like dropped our kid off on the side of the road and went on to be an adult, and the kid's still sitting there waiting for us to come back,
Mm. Yeah.
waiting for us to make a U-turn and come back and put them in the car and actually have a
Mm.
conversation with them. Because
Yeah.
that's what we wanted as a kid is we just wanted somebody to talk to us about what was going on and help
Right.
us navigate our feelings and see who we
Mm.
were and not discount us or put us down or say that we shouldn't feel that way or any of that stuff. So it
Yeah.
if you can get a person to start to see this little kid, even if they might think of it as separate from themselves, as
Yeah.
something that's, I mean, it would be a hard person who couldn't look at a 5-year-old in pain and have some compassion, right?
Sure.
I guess, yeah, they're out there, and then you
Yeah.
can get them to think, oh, that's actually you. And
Right.
that little person has just been waiting for you and all your busyness and all your perfection and all
Mhm.
your affairs and all your drinking, just been waiting for you to come back around and pick you up.
Mm.
And that's usually when lots of emotional stuff starts happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've had this little aha moment here of getting me to go back, or getting a person to go back to revisit their past or to talk about their past, isn't as much about just replaying the events. It's like, why the hell do I need to replay all these events? It's about returning to the part of ourselves that got abandoned along the way, right? Maybe in some
Right.
sense. Yes. So I have to go back to the narrative that allows me to go back to myself where you got dropped off along the side of the road. So when returning to my
Right.
past, I'm actually returning to myself and to the parts of myself that I abandoned so I can see them and heal them. True.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's one thing to know, and we were talking about this a little earlier, it's one thing to make the connection that you dropped the kid off on the road.
Mm,
Where I mean, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's
sure.
useful. It's totally important because you have to get it before you can actually heal it. You have to like
Mm,
understand it, right?
yeah. Yeah.
So you get the person to understand that's what happened. Then you get them to put the kid back in the car and have a
Mm,
conversation, and that's where the
wow.
healing happens. A lot of
Good.
therapy doesn't work because a therapist will get the person to go, "Oh yeah, that's what happened," but they never get the person to get the kid in the car to really get to the root of the healing. And
Mm.
that is, I'm sure you remember, that is some
Oh, yeah.
pretty intense emotional stuff.
It is. Yeah. Wow. Even now in this moment, I'm having these emotions come up as I've been thinking about me as a little tyke, myself in the car with me being my healer, me being my protector, me going back to loving, man, this kid who just felt like abandoned. And then I was ashamed of him. And then he's like, well, now I'm double, triple abandoned and I'm stuck here. And so when people feel stuck in life, it's probably that there's a part of them that's stuck in the past, you know? Not always, but in a lot of places, right?
You're catching on.
Ah, I'm getting there. Okay, good.
You're
We're having a
getting
therapy
there.
session. I like
You're
this. I
not
like
going to
this.
need me.
No, no, I am. And so it's identifying the areas that we're stuck in or that I'm stuck in. I can't seem to figure out how to make this communication process work. I can't figure out how to get deep intimacy with my spouse, or nobody ever sees me. Well,
Or I
where did
always
that
feel unsafe.
always feel unsafe? Where did that part of me get stuck? And then how do I go get myself unstuck? By inviting the little guy into the car and having that conversation and
Yeah,
understanding
and
that.
saying, what do you need? And then the part is making a pact, if you will. I'm making it sound easy, but basically making a pact that I'm never going to leave you alone again.
Mm, wow.
I'm never going to let them do to you what
Mm,
happened. I will protect you. I will listen to you. And then I'll, like, surprise,
yeah.
surprise, once a human
Mm,
being gets seen and gets heard and gets listened to, they just feel better.
yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah.
start to feel safe. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. I was in my bedroom the other night, about 2 nights ago, and out of nowhere, I'm having this remembrance of me being terrified. There's a certain house in my childhood that I remember, and I'm sure when people have experienced trauma, they remember, very clear, distinct places and spaces, right? But there's this one particular house where a lot of things are kind of seared in my head. And I won't talk about all those, but one of the things that hit me the other night was when I was a real little guy. I think it was 5, 6, or however old it was. My parents showed me The Exorcist. Now, some people listening to that may think, well, no big deal, but it was a huge deal for me to watch.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, big deal. And so it terrified me. And I remember at night where I couldn't sleep in the bed. I had to sleep on the floor because there's a scene in The Exorcist where the bed's shaking. And so I'm constantly afraid that bed's going to start shaking. And so then all of a sudden I'm sleeping in the floor, but then that wouldn't work. So I would open the door and I would sleep with half my body outside the room and half my body inside the room. And I'd turn the hall light on and sleep that way for years. And I remember sitting there the other night and just all of a sudden really connecting with that absolutely terrified kid who the terror of that, and who had no access to an adult to help soothe or comfort, and had no idea how to soothe or comfort myself, and so would go sleepless nights, and then get in trouble for sleeping out in the hallway for some reason, who knows, and that I wasn't tough enough to handle it, and I needed to get my ass back in bed and man up and figure out how to handle it. And so when you think about that, that was a very clear moment for me in what we're talking about here, to be able to move beyond just, oh, I saw that happened with me, and yeah, that's really tough that would happen to a kid, to really connecting to the point of getting deeply emotional about that was me, terrified as a little child with no access to feeling safe. No wonder I felt unsafe the majority of my life,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You may or may not know this, but what therapy is really doing is allowing you to have what we call a corrective experience.
Okay, talk to me about that.
Yeah, so you feel that pain, right, in therapy. You connect to that, right?
Yep.
And I, or whoever is your therapist, is actually your parent. We
Okay.
never say that. But
Right.
we're doing what your parent should have done in that moment,
Right.
which is held space for you, made you feel loved, made you feel supported, made you feel like you could talk about what was going on, make you validated. And
Yeah.
so that's part of the beauty of what's happening in therapy, is that your therapist, who you've grown to be close to and that you trust and that does a great job listening to you, that's when you have a corrective experience, and that's when the healing happens.
Yeah. Wow. So
You
true,
didn't know I
right?
was your parent?
Well, I mean, no, I sure didn't. I'm learning all things all the time, Lisa.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's beautiful because as we've talked about, and one of the things I work with people on is like you have this experience, traumatic, and it's not just what happens to you, but in you, and then you make decisions about people, life, and most importantly about yourself. And then that becomes a core belief, and that core belief begins to have all these
Yes.
behaviors, and then those behaviors begin to drive, our personality, and that's who we now all of a sudden we think that we are, and it begins to wreak all this havoc, and we're trying to deal with the behaviors, but yet what you're talking about is that going back and correcting the experience, because correcting the experience then can help us make new decisions about ourselves in life, right? Which then can
Right?
help us adopt new core beliefs about ourselves and the way that we see ourselves and the way of what we should have experienced and shouldn't have experienced, etc., which then begins to blossom new behaviors in our life. And so that piece, those new experiences and those corrective experiences, how how can a person help themselves in those corrective experiences? Because you get the kid back in the car, and you're listening to this podcast, and maybe you're not able right now to do therapy with somebody or whatever your situation is. Are there ways that a person can give themselves corrective experiences?
Yes, there
Okay.
is. And I'm going to go back and say what you were saying is the corrective experience is fixing the foundation.
Ah, yeah.
That's what that is. The corrective experience is fixing the foundation, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
how a person can do that is people aren't going to like my answer, but cry.
Ah, okay. I
Yeah,
don't like that answer because you've been trying to get me to cry for years. And I'm just
I
kidding. I do.
know.
I've had a few of my
I
moments. I'm
know.
still working on it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, crying. I mean,
Okay.
that's kind of the overarching emotional experience. But literally, you could get out pictures of yourself as a little person if you have them, and
Okay.
you can just think about what was going on. You could write a letter, which sometimes I have clients do, is write a letter as the adult to the small person and let them know how sorry they were about what happened, and make a, write a letter saying that who they will be in relationship with that little kid from now on.
Yeah.
You can have the little kid write a letter,
Okay.
saying what's going on with them. And sometimes therapists will even have that person write in their non-dominant hand to get them in touch with the little person. I've never
Yeah.
done that, but I've heard of that.
Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah, there's techniques to do it. And when you do it, right, the thing is when you start to feel emotion, any of it, when your body starts to feel any twinge of anger or sadness, whatever it is, you have to not shove that back down.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. You have to grab a hold of it and be with it.
Yeah.
You don't have to react to it. You don't have to, go out and drink or go out and screw around or go out and do whatever you do, right? You just need to be with it, because that's what that kid needed someone to be with it with them.
Yeah.
So if you have a therapist, the therapist will be with it with you. But if you're
Right.
running solo, like you're talking about with people maybe listening to this podcast, you get to be with it. And
Yeah.
it will be uncomfortable, but you won't die.
Sure. Right. And it is about that part, I think, of witnessing, right? It doesn't mean you have to get lost in it, like you were saying, but non-resistance towards it and witnessing it. Would that be a correct word? Like, let me just witness this part
Yeah.
instead of shoving it down. I remember we were on a call and some emotions really started to come up for me, and I started to get, the moment where if you let yourself go a few more steps, you're going to be boohooing. And so one tactic
Could you
that
rephrase that boo-hooing, please?
okay, absolutely, I will. So if you let yourself go with it, you know that you're going to be sobbing. You're going to be
There
letting
you
things
go.
out. You're going to be cleaning out that system, right? And I remember that, I started to feel that, and I started to hold my breath. And you said, breathe. And you were sneaky because you knew if I started to breathe, I wouldn't be able to have the same resistance towards it, right? And holding our breath
Yeah.
is an act of resistance, I guess, in some sense. And so when I allowed myself to breathe, man, did I just started crying and,
Yeah.
Even get emotional thinking about it right now. But it was a very cleansing moment to be witnessed in that state, to not be judged for it, and to allow myself to not resist or to get past that initial resistance. And so, so thank you for that. Thank you for that,
You're
Jackie.
welcome. Yeah. The holding your breath is, and I think that's just a biological thing, right? Is that,
Yeah.
to keep feelings down, to keep, when we're scared, when we're
Yeah.
threatened, I mean, just kind of and clench down, grin and bear it. But if you
Yeah.
ask someone to breathe, you just cannot keep emotions down. If you open up the airway, it'll just, and most people hold it like right about here.
Yeah. hmm Right at that surface. Yep. You can feel it. You can feel all of it coming up. And and I'm finding more and more the gift of allowing that to come out. And what it's also helping me to do is get in touch with emotions that I hadn't gotten in touch with before, because it's interesting, right? The emotions are interesting, I guess, in the sense, Lisa, and help me with this, that when you suppress some of your emotions, you kind of wind up suppressing all of them, right?
Yeah.
It's like we want to selectively suppress emotions, and how does that work for us? How do we do it? Is that something that works very well for us, Lisa?
Oh, I mean, it is true. If you dial down, the ones you don't like, you're going to dial down the ones you do like.
Yeah.
Although people do get pretty good at, and my mother's not going to watch this, so I can even say my mother's really good at only expressing the ones that feel good. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it really limits us, because
Yeah.
we're designed to have the whole experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to somebody, a friend, and they were just talking about, well, I don't, like, why do I even need to experience negative emotions, man? It just seems kind of pointless. I just need to keep on the positive vibe and the good feels, and, doing the negative emotions just feels like, a waste of time and just drags my energy down. And so I'm just going to stuff and move forward. And thoughts on that as a healthy practice?
Yeah, it's just not. I mean,
Yeah.
physically and in our psyche, we are meant to, we're meant to process stuff and eliminate it.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
emotions work the same way. I mean,
Yeah.
you can imagine, right? If you never allowed yourself to, if you just stuffed happiness, say you saw a
Yeah.
comedian all the time and you were laughing and it was funny, but you never allowed yourself to laugh. You just
Right.
held it all in. I mean, you would spontaneously combust,
Yeah.
right? I
Right.
couldn't
Exactly.
watch Wanda Sykes for more than 15 seconds without busting
Yeah.
up, right? And
Right.
so
Right.
if you
Yeah.
did that, it just doesn't make any sense. It's just that we
Yeah.
don't want to feel because we didn't have parents who taught us how to feel and that we wouldn't die and didn't show us. I mean, how many parents do I have that, I'll say, well, do your kids know how sad you are? No, I don't want to worry them. You don't want to
Yeah.
worry them. You're responsible for teaching them what to do with
Yeah.
that, right? What that
Yeah.
looks like, that you won't die, that you can come around. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like, well, are you going to like give your kid the keys to the car without ever letting them see you
Mm.
drive? It
Yeah.
doesn't make any
Right.
sense.
No, it doesn't make any
So,
sense. Yeah, emotional training, understanding how to deal with emotions, which is like such a key part. I remember you telling me that my emotions are my superpower, and learning how to get in touch with my emotions, especially once again as an ENFP, but not just for ENFPs, but for all of us, that place of living deeply in our emotions, but yet when we've not been taught how to deal with them, or we've been taught to keep them suppressed, right? Don't cry about that, or I'll give you something to cry about. That kind of language, or man up, toughen up, or don't be this, that, or the other thing. And so, yeah, walking around with a
yeah,
lot of pain.
so what I've been wanting to say to you, and I'm glad I remembered, is that when you don't allow yourself to, when you tell yourself you're boo-hooing, right?
Hmm.
When you don't allow yourself to feel, you're doing that again to yourself as a kid.
Mm. Yeah,
You're
yeah,
doing the same thing that happened to you as a kid. That's why it's so important that you don't do it.
yeah,
Because that kid already got enough of being told, man up or don't be a pussy or
yeah.
whatever people say,
Yep,
right? They already got
absolutely.
that. So when you're feeling something and you go, oh, Jerry, stop boo hooing, you're
Yeah,
doing the
right.
same thing to that kid again.
Mm. Yeah, right. Hmm. I'm repeating my training that I got as a kid. I'm just
Yep.
re-executing that on myself again. Sure,
Right.
absolutely. And no healing taking place.
No
Yeah,
healing, and actually harm, right?
yeah,
But when you say to the kid, your boo hooing adult self,
mm,
wow, it's really hard to feel these things. It's super, super,
yeah,
super scary and tough, and you're really
yeah,
courageous, right? If
yeah,
you say that to yourself and let yourself cry, then you've actually done what that kid needed because that kid needed to say, it's really scary to see The Exorcist.
yeah,
I
right,
understand that you're really afraid and how smart you are to sleep half in the room and half in the hallway. You're
yeah,
so resourceful.
yeah, right,
And I'm so
absolutely,
sorry that you had to see that movie and you will never have to see it again if you don't want to. That's
right,
what should have happened. And
right,
cry, honey.
absolutely.
You can cry in my arms until you're done crying. But that
Mm.
did not happen.
Yeah, no, did not happen. And it's interesting, once again, back to the thought of I'm, as an adult male, trying to manage what I'm thinking is an adult male's response to something in the moment, right? Like, let me try to unpack this a little bit. So I'm in a situation where maybe I'm feeling fear or anxiety unknowingly, like, and then as a man, it's just like, come on, man, just toughen up. And when I say as a man, just kind of these
Right.
stereotypes that we have of what a man should be or shouldn't do, et cetera, that are so stupid, uh,
Archaic.
archaic, stupid, and all of the words that we could try to put on that. But it's the adult Jerry looking at adult Jerry now going, dude, get it together. Stop being X, Y, and Z. But yet, what I had to come to, and what was really just such a beautiful connection, was no, when that's happening, that's Jerry as a child that adult Jerry needs to respond to as a loving
Uh-huh.
man with
Right.
courage and integrity and with boldness to meet that young child, that hurting part of me. And to do what you just said, to dismiss that part of me is abusive and is not, what any man would want to be showing up on this planet doing, treating a child that way, but we dismiss it because it's us. And so we get really confused about it's not adult Jerry trying to deal with adult Jerry. It's
Yep.
adult Jerry who needs to figure out how to respond to little Jerry in that moment. And how does he do that? He doesn't
Right.
stuff it. He doesn't make fun of himself. He sees that part of himself. So,
Because
yeah,
that's the opportunity, right?
mm, yeah,
In that moment, that's the opportunity to heal yourself, to
yeah,
return
mhm,
back to yourself, to give yourself permission to love yourself. There's the
yeah,
opportunity, and you get to choose what you do with that at that moment. Or, you can stay in therapy forever.
mm,
Because, I mean, I'd never get rid of you if I
yeah,
could. But you
yeah,
stay in therapy forever, and, your therapist keeps reminding you that
yeah,
those moments are super important. Or, you decide, oh yeah, those are really important, and I'm, at the middle of, I'm in work, and I'm at
mm,
my desk, and I'm given the opportunity to either, just hammer on myself, or know that this person in behind this desk in this chair is actually my 6-year-old self who's desperately looking for
mm,
approval, and I really don't have to shame them.
yeah.
But it's a whole different way of being in the world, because we love to be hard on ourselves. We think that's motivating, and it's so dangerous.
Well, it is dangerous because I've got a quote that I shares that shaming yourself and relentlessly criticizing yourself doesn't cause you to change or to heal. It just simply turns you into your own abuser, right? And so now you're just your own abuser, thinking that punishment is corrective, thinking that the way that you were treated. So now you need to treat yourself that way to make change happen. And it is trying to serve us. It is a safety valve that we're trying, or it is a safety mechanism that we're trying to use because we're afraid that if we don't do that to ourselves, we'll stay stuck, versus loving as a much more healing way to live life. I like to talk about love yourself in a way that the parts of you that are hiding and that are in pain feel safe to be seen by you, right? And so the parts that my 5-year-old didn't feel safe to be seen by me and to express what it needed because I was shaming it and pushing it away, but giving myself permission to love myself and loving parts of myself and continuing to figure out how to love parts of myself in such a way that I feel safe to be seen by myself. I feel safe to be in my own presence, instead of wreaking havoc on my nervous system by constantly shaming myself. So.
So, are you saying that you're making a commitment to never tell yourself to stop boohooing?
Well, I think that would be a good idea, Lisa. I think that as a result of our session today, yes, I think that would be a fantastic thing for me to commit to. No more saying
Just,
I'm boohooing.
you are
Yeah,
not boohooing.
no, I am expressing a deep need, yeah, I am expressing a very deep part of myself that is in pain and needs me to know that it's in pain and have me respond in love and not to shame it or to minimize it in any way. So, yeah,
Yeah, sounds
something
good.
like that. Yeah, all right,
Something
well,
like
good.
that. Yeah, there's so much to talk about with this subject.
There is, absolutely.
Yep.
So we'll have to do another episode on it. We'll have a part two around it.
Cool.
So I want to close this out with a couple of thoughts. One is a question, and then one is maybe providing people with a practice that they can take with them. So it's interesting to me because people will ask me the question, do you regret what happened to you in your life? And, do you wish that any of it didn't happen? And, at this point, I'm good, right? It's a part of the story. It all belongs. it's made me who I am, and part of that, is still things that I'm continuing to work on and grow in, and other ones that I just deeply, and I'm learning to cherish all of it, right? And there's parts that I cherish more, and parts that, not so much. And so you often will get people who will feel like, well, why do I need to like go back and heal this stuff? Why do I need to get rid of or address certain things in my childhood? They've made me who I am today. They've made me strong. They've made me resilient.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that's a beautiful gift, right? But is there
Totally.
ever any confusion around that space of like, feels like, we think that it's either A, B, binary choice of, you have to either like keep it all or get rid of it, or where's that space between honoring that it made you who you are today, but yet still allowing yourself to investigate how it's not serving you?
Right. Well, there you have it, right? We've been talking about so much of that. How do I
Yeah.
hold my parents responsible and also understand that they did the best they could, right?
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
so much of this has been both and,
Yeah.
right? And so what you're
Right.
talking about is how do I honor the fact that it actually gave me some strengths. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm fiercely independent. Lots of times that's what will come out. I'm somebody that has incredible compassion. I
Hmm.
I'm good with money,
Yeah.
whatever it is, because my
Right.
parents were broke and I had to figure out how to financially take care of myself. So you can keep all that, right?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
also you can still acknowledge that those were great things that came out of some pretty tough circumstances. I
Mm.
mean, both things can be true, right?
Yeah.
You can be terrified and excited at the same time.
Mm. Yeah, that's great because we don't want to confuse the fact that healing my childhood or healing the past or going back there
Mhm.
means that I have to give up who that made me become in some ways, right? The good qualities of who that made me become. And so it doesn't mean you need to give up your strength and your fierce independence. Those are things that we've developed that are survival mechanisms and beautiful things that really help us in our journey, right? And
Totally.
so, yeah, so healing doesn't mean you have to give up the gifts that came along. It just means that we're healing the things that aren't serving us anymore. Does that make sense?
Right.
Or is that,
And it's the
yeah,
same thing with your parents, right? Holding
yeah,
them accountable. You don't have to get rid of all the things that are great about your
mm,
parents, that you love about them. You
yeah,
know, your parents might have given you a great work ethic, or they might have given you, a
hmm,
love of God and appreciation of nature,
yeah,
whatever. So
yeah,
as an adult, as you're doing this healing work, you get to go back and pick. These are parts of
mm,
myself I like to keep because I
yeah,
got them from my parents and they're working
hmm,
for me. And these are parts of myself I don't want anymore. I don't have those values that
hmm,
my parents have. This part isn't serving me. So
mm,
you get to be an adult in this process and figure out what you want to keep and what you want to throw away.
absolutely, 100%. Love that.
Yeah, yeah,
So I always like to leave people with at least some little takeaway other than, the ahas, the mentions. And we did that a little bit about writing the letter and how to, allow yourself to be your own witnesser and to sit with yourself. So we were talking earlier about the part of us that as an adult, or whatever, young adult, whatever our story is, that we can go back and we can return to the parts of us that got abandoned, invite that part of ourselves into the car and begin to become curious and ask questions. What are some questions that you might encourage people to do if they were to go through a visualization process of doing that? Um, what would you maybe give them some examples if they're feeling stuck in that practice of, well, how do I do that? And what would be some questions that I would ask, etc.? Could you maybe help some people with that exercise?
okay. Um, how about the first question? What mattered to you?
Mm, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
how about just getting curious with his kid? What
Okay.
mattered to you? What did you want someone to know about you?
Yeah.
What was something that you hid from the world?
Mm, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, what was your favorite thing to do and why?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, who did you feel like you could talk to? And maybe that was just a stuffed animal, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did you most want that thing or that person to know about your life?
Yeah.
So there you go.
No, that's good because, right, I mean, if I'm thinking about somebody thinking, okay, I'm doing this, and like, what am I going to say to my little self here? How do I even get started on this? And one question that you've always encouraged me to ask and to ask others is just that simple question of, what do you need? Right? Like, what do you need in this moment? And to just sit and listen to see what arises. Yeah. So what do I do with it when it arises, Lisa? What do I do with the answer that comes from that? Would you encourage people to lean into it a little bit more?
Yeah, or we can keep asking questions based on that answer. Because what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to get to know that little kid. So
Okay.
if ask the little kid a question and say, who did you trust at that moment, your time in your life, and the kid says, nobody, then the next obvious question would be, did you wish that you had somebody to trust? Or have you ever had somebody to trust? So you just keep kind of staying curious about that because you're trying to build a relationship with that younger kid. And you're just trying to be curious because I don't know about you, but I can imagine myself at 6 years old, what it would have been like to have somebody sit down and just say, ask me questions about who I am and what I cared about.
Yeah.
It would have been a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hmm. And what if a person gets the kid in the car and they're angry at the kid? And what do you do in that scenario? And they just
That
want to tell the
they're,
kid all the reasons why they were a loser and all that. All those feelings start to come up, and that
well,
power's.
yep, you gotta go with that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's
You,
okay, right?
it's
Yeah.
totally okay. Whatever's there is okay, and whatever there is meaningful, and whatever there is useful, and whatever's there needs to have a place to be said.
Yeah.
And you could be
Absolutely.
mad at the kid, right? Mad at the kid for, why did you have to make things worse? Or why couldn't you have fixed this? Or why were you such a brat? Or, you know,
Yeah. Hmm.
why did you have
Absolutely.
to be chubby?
Right.
Made
Yeah.
life so
Well,
hard on yourself being chubby.
yeah. Why'd you have to be so awkward and be such a disappointment? And why'd you have to get in trouble and make mom and dad's lives miserable to the point to where they were constantly having to deal with you and take things out on you? And why couldn't you just had your act together? And why couldn't you be
Yeah,
born in a different family? Or whatever the narrative is. It's a yeah. So,
right. And then the interesting thing would be to let the kid answer, right?
yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, why did I? Yeah, because nobody was there for me except, ding dongs, which was my
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah. Wow. Whew, you get your meeting hand. You get me kind of emotional on that one because you start to hear the responses of a child, and instead of you answering for the child, allowing the child to answer, I mean, that's going to have to, I can feel it right now. That's going to have to break open some things within you. Not going to have to, but it would seem to break open some things within you to hear that little part of yourself answering in such a way for you to hear that. Yeah,
Right.
beautiful.
And that's why it's a beautiful thing. I mean, not, promoting my profession, but promoting
Yeah,
my profession.
yeah,
That's why it's just a beautiful thing to have a therapist there who can help be there on this journey. We're not the ones, I mean, I'm doing my own work, right? I'm
yeah,
not the one doing your work, but I'm also beside you along the way. And it can be, if you're walking up a really rigorous mountain trail and you don't know what the hell you're doing or where you're going, it could be
yeah.
really great to have a guide.
Sure can. Absolutely. 100%. Well, speaking of people working with a therapist, Lisa, I know that you not only offer one-on-one therapy services, but you also do individual coaching. So if people are listening to this podcast and watching this podcast and they're really resonating with you and the style that you do it in, how could they get a hold of you? What would be the easiest way for them to get in touch with you?
The easiest way would be just to reach out with an email, and that's green like the color, Lisa5164 at me.com. Yeah, love to hear from you.
Lisa, thank you so much for another episode and our time together here on the Permission to Love podcast. I know the listeners and the viewers are getting so much value out of this, so thank you for the gift that you are, and thank you for the gift of your time.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having the courage to do this.
Well, what another amazing time with Lisa. Thank you to every one of you for listening to this episode. Now, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe or to follow, please do so, because that'll keep you updated on when new episodes come out. And if you haven't had a chance to rate it or review it, that would really help the show. It'll help extend its reach and help more people understand how they can give themselves the permission to love themselves. And so thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for making your time. And I want to remind you, as always, you are worthy of your own love.